Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy, The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land. Before I jump in with today's guest, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really helps us get this work done. As you might know from my books, I'm an autism dad. And over the last 20 years, we've developed several equine-assisted, neuroscience-backed certification programs. If you'd like to find out more about them, go to newtrailslearning.com. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest. Welcome back, rockers. We have Dr. Mark Uranga here from Idaho. And if you're wondering where the name Uranga comes from, it's Basque Spanish, also Basque French, which is this interesting corner of the Atlantic semi-Celtic fringe in Europe. And some of you may know that there was a large-scale emigration of Basque shepherds to the United States in the 19th and early 20th century. So there is an interesting subculture. And I went and did a training in Idaho last year and was lucky enough to meet Mark, who brought his mule to the training. And the mule was the star for the show, for sure. And Mark intrigued me because as a doctor and a pediatrician, he has some interesting insights on the work that we all do. And I think it is always useful for us to know that doctors actually do support this stuff and, don't just roll their eyes and say, well, you guys are just playing with ponies. So it's nice that we have a chance to get him on here and ask him why does he think that equine assisted stuff is valid? What does it do? And so on. So without further ado, Mark, who are you? What do you do? And take it from there.
Well, thank you first for all the work that you do to advance the idea that there's growth to be had for families and for children outside of a clinical model, specifically speaking, one confined to buildings and to people with different types of degrees. My background is, as you mentioned, as a Basque Idahoan, and I don't know that I can separate the two. I was born and raised in Boise, Idaho, and from an early age thought I might be a veterinarian. At about the age of 20, when it was time to take the test for veterinary school or medical school, I felt drawn to a little bit richer involvement with families and complexities of human-centered medicine. And from there, I went to medical school and trained in pediatrics and have been practicing for about 14 years in the Boise area, a year or two before that in New Hampshire. And the richness of the clinical environment is something that I treasure every day. It is not always the place to make inroads for people that struggle to sit still or to be in a confined space, but it is a place that about 20 times a day, I test the interactions with children, adolescents, and their caregivers. And the draw of that for me was initially to show parents how interacting, even in moments of time, can really help children feel more safe, more comfortable. Clearly, the pediatrician's office, if any of us remembered, it's mostly about shots and it's mostly about inconveniences and fear, either because of going with illness or getting a shot. And some of our training, I was lucky enough to have mentors who emphasize the value of making a child comfortable. And what I quickly found is that a comfortable child is a more reliable patient, somebody that I can learn their nuances much more quickly. I think that having been drawn to pediatrics, it came from a background where I was lucky enough, as you mentioned, to grow up in a kind of a community within a community. So in current life, a lot of us aren't around children anymore. And I was lucky enough to go to a daycare from 8 weeks old to about 12 years old, where a Basque woman modeled the interactions with children. And I was surrounded by little kids at a time where I didn't have necessarily a lot of cousins or 10 siblings or anything like that. But that early experience help me be comfortable with children. So as I was modeling that in clinic, it's become more and more clear that this communication that we develop in moments within a clinic visit really makes a difference in the interactions with a child.
You said you were lucky enough. I don't hear many people say I was lucky enough to go to a daycare, So clearly that was a positive experience. What is special, do you think, about the Basque approach to children and family?
It's a great question, and one that I've had a couple opportunities to explore that both in growing. The Basque culture has always been a little stubborn and has also been defined by a language that it's not a Romance language by background. So the overlap with invaders or visitors from Rome and elsewhere was more problematic for the conquerors. And so there's sort of this history of a little bit of nuanced and more isolated approach to community. And within that, the family becomes a really important kind of seed. And so as many immigrant stories are, families coming over came with different attachments, different sponsors, and the sort of things that allowed them to start to thrive in our community. And as I grew up, my grandfather was an immigrant. We're removed from the immigrant experience per se, but the culture that followed that was one in which grandparents knew grandchildren and grandchildren were friends with cousins. And so the modeling and that combined ability to reach out yet feel protected is something that I think is really well modeled in our community here. Now, having maintained a connection, the very social, the hyper social model, I would argue, within Basque society really is one that encourages a give and take at the daycare and younger age level. And simply by, I suppose, absorption of those ideas, it just felt more comfortable, I think, to be around children and to allow those children to drive towards their areas of interest and comfort. Whereas in a group that's maybe a little bit more nuclear family or family centered, where it's been kind of gratifying, or I suppose it's been held up as a standard that a single adult or maybe two adults will provide the role modeling and the limits, and the interactions outside of the family can be more limited. I think a community-oriented upbringing allows people to see those different models and to feel more comfortable within a time where, an 8-year-old is carrying around an 8-month-old, and these things that don't always happen so much anymore.
That was what was going on at your daycare?
Yeah,
That's
certainly
very
some
unusual,
of that,
in our culture.
Yeah, quite unusual in the American culture that even within many daycares, it's, the kids under 1 year, and then 1 to 2, they do a different thing because they're walking and more mobile. And then there's this kind of napping age and the age after kindergarten. So it does isolate those peer groups.
It's interesting. I mean, it seems to me what you're putting your finger on here is tribe. Would you say? Yeah.
Yeah. And tribe is something that has value and has downsides. But I think that the value in tribal upbringing, as it were, is that trusted adult that adds something to what a parent's offering, the increasing responsibilities that you touch on in a lot of your work, the learning that goes along with that, so that it's more an experiential approach to especially social problem solving, I think.
Do you feel also that, I mean, not all tribes are nice tribes, but let's assume that you had a good, it seems that you had a good experience, so that this tribe is good. Do you feel that the Basque community is particularly good at letting things be child-led? And if so, why might that be?
I do believe that much more clearly in the current European Basques, the ones who are still in Spain and somewhat in France. And I think that's because they want to keep talking to their adult friends and let the children have their space. I think there's that recognition that there's safety, a given plaza or a shared common space where things are safe, but there are conflicts, there are sharp edges, there are things that scrape knees and hurt feelings and those sorts of things, but they're in a location where they can recover from that with a feeling of
That's
safety.
interesting. So why do you feel that kind of tribal model builds resilience then, as you say? So scrape knees and hurt feelings, we're so shy of that stuff now. We think people are really quick to jump to immediately to trauma, rather than, and then of course now there's interestingly a movement coming saying, well, yes, but there's a whole kind of growth after trauma thing. But getting a scraped knee and a hurt feeling as a kid isn't necessarily traumatic. It might be unpleasant, but it's also kind of necessary preparation for what we're going to meet in the world. What again, just I'm intrigued by your experience as a Basque, and then how this has informed your approach to pediatrics and the equine assisted world, which we're going to come back to in a minute. But I do think this is great context for people because not everyone is coming out of this kind of tribal background, particularly in the West, so you're quite unique in this way. And I think there's a lot to offer. So I want to sort of mine that vein for a while. Sure. So when you say sharp edges, scrape knees, hurt feelings, but in a safe space, can you elucidate a bit more on what you feel the value of that is and what that leads to in adolescence and adult life for people?
Yeah, I think that we have lost that graded experience of living. The things that I learn where I'm not protected, but where I can recover. So there's, as you mentioned, the trauma literature, which is an area that affects different people differently and can be expanded by its scope to include things that are more an opportunity for growth in some people than an opportunity for destruction. And even within what I'll call allopathic medical literature, the literature that's largely informed by MDs and people with degrees and these sorts of things, the paradigm about mental health or resilience does start to include some ideas that the practiced resilience, the times that somebody had recovered from trauma, as it were, is that it builds that resilience. An example is well known within pediatrics now, where children who are seeking an independent experience, let's say in Idaho, maybe walking to the store to buy some Tic Tacs or whatever it is, as a trauma focused society, our first thought would be cars, bad people. What if they don't have the right change? All these sorts of things. As a resilience associated paradigm, we look at that as the opportunity to interact with somebody that might cut in line, to have to figure out the math on their own. And these early steps are the same things that apply when a high school senior doesn't get accepted to their number one choice of school. And if everything has been bubble wrapped up until that first negative experience, then there's no practice. There's not been a pattern of rebound that a family can mine and then can take advantage of.
It's really interesting because, there's a lot of talk, people tend to think in extremes. And so in the sort of trauma-informed world, there's also this idea of adverse childhood experience, and that this lessens the chances of success and thriving later. But what I find interesting about that is so many of the people I know who do thrive have had adverse childhood experiences, and then is a scraped knee, falling out of a tree, falling off your horse, breaking a limb, that sort of thing, an adverse childhood experience, or is that a just planet Earth experience? Like, have we allowed trauma and adverse experience to now become a sort of abused term that has now sort of bled into normal experience, so that now we're afraid of normal experience. Just talk to us a little bit about the dance there, psychologically and emotionally, for the young growing human.
Yeah, I think one of the best areas I see that it's just so concrete, and I think all of us can relate to it, is the child who falls in front of a parent, and what is the message sent by the parent. So 2 years old, they trip on their own feet, and is the response concern? Is it over concern? Is it on the more negative side? Is it mockery or something else like that? The way I can predict, not based on the fall, how that child will react, but based on the parent's reaction, right? So the mechanism is immaterial to the response. And that is where I get back to the sense of safety, like you were talking about, a sharp edge, yet a safe recovery from that. So the child who falls and whose parent is, oh yeah, let's get up and keep moving, or too bad that happened, or make a joke about not breaking the floor, or whatever it is, they move on. But the one who's concerned or so sad or anything, that child is much more likely to escalate based on the signals they receive from their trusted adult. And I think that moving forward, as we build these patterns, we basically have experiences that are pre-verbal, and through general development, we build upon those verbal experiences and our emotions. And yes, we add words to them, but in the background, an experience is usually going to elicit an emotion first. So if our experience has been to rebound, then our first response to a lost job or the death of a loved one is that sense of rebound. If it's been signaled to us that those are traumas, then they become traumas. And I'm fortunate, I believe, to have models in the community and in parents and in others where the rebound is emphasized. And I think as you look at this variability of what do we call an adverse child event, what do we call a trauma, and the response to that, as you basically, I'm a pediatrician. I love to think of all people as grown-up toddlers. Toddlers are just more honest.
I certainly am in that category. I've never really stopped being a toddler. I just got bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's true of all of us. Some of us embrace it. And so all the more power to you, Rupert, to have embraced that. But we have that.
It's impossible to deny.
So we have that response. So we move forward from that based on our experiences, and it's all practice.
Do you feel that this emphasis on resilience in the Basque community? I see. I'm half Jewish. I'm half Ashkenazi Jewish, and obviously in our heritage, even though I look like a Viking because my mother's side is Viking, but my father's side is Ashkenazi Jewish. My father looks like Saddam Hussein, and we had this joke when they were looking for Saddam that I was going to show up at the Pentagon with him, say, "Look, I got him," and then he and I would split the money. But the Ashkenazi experience was pogroms. Always have to have one eye on the exit because you never know, and how the more you thrive as a community, the more likely it is that some bastard somewhere is going to come along, decide to take it from you.
Yep.
So, and your community in a nasty, bloody kind of a way. So you better kind of have options. So you want to have family, and you want to have family in other countries and other cities, so that you've got lines of exit. And if there's always more of them than there are of you. So, and there is no homeland. Now, you, on the other hand, come from somewhat the opposite, but so there is a homeland. Yeah. However, there's lots of invaders, so for those who don't know their European history, everyone and their dog has tried to invade the Basque territories at some point. Why? Because they sit at a very, very sort of strategic and fertile and pleasantly climated juncture of the Western, European Atlantic, right there, sort of at the top of Portugal and Spain and the southern bit of France, and it's jolly nice there. So anyone who ever came through went, "Oh, it's nice here. I think I'll have some of that." And the mountain people living there, who, as you said, were speaking a language that predates all of these other European languages and have been there seemingly as a composite community, much for millennia, despite all of these tribal migrations going across Europe, and managed to hold their own in this mountain fastness. Yet everyone tried to take it from them. And the fact that they are still there is somewhat of a miracle. It's not dissimilar to the Kurds up there in northern Iraq and eastern Turkey and so on, who've somehow managed to hold on to that area despite, ridiculous amounts of assault. So do, that can create a certain bitterness, or it can create a certain let's seize the day and live type. And we've survived this long, so probably we'll survive again. And from the pogrom point of view, as well, they killed so many of us that we're sort of whittled down to, the special forces now. So, we're quite good at survival. Do you feel that is there a bit of a heritage that way? Like you bit the Native Americans of Western Europe in a funny way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just talk through that idea of resilience and survival a little bit for us before we go into actual equine assisted stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I think you get to both of those having a creation story or a creation myth, depending on how you like to think about it.
And go on. That's interesting.
The creation story, we all have a creation story. I love the nexus of how my creation story interacts with the creation story of the Idaho Basques or the Basque country itself. Your story of migration continuing as long as written Torah stories were placed, the Jews were on the move, and you moved from South Africa confidently to Germany, and how we each fit in these stories. The relationship, I believe, to parenting and pediatrics lies in a concept of what is called authoritative parenting, not authoritarian.
Parenting.
Yeah.
Okay, how is that different from authoritarian?
Exactly. So, and different from passive parenting or permissive parenting. The middle ground is that which recognizes the variability of a child and does not force upon them certain things, but provides the background, the framework from which a child essentially defines themselves. So whether that definition is in contrast to the family expectations or in alignment, there's still a foundation that's provided with that. So the idea being that a family exists within a community of Basques defines themselves as partly stubborn, quite social, very committed to their shared background. And within that Basque community, defining our family as being committed to each other, having a shared background, and being somewhat stubborn or persistent, those allow for our children to consider a model that is either in tune with their growth or in contrast with that. And all communities have their rebels or their black sheep, and those people are equally as defined by their community. I think where it provides that foundation, there's a little bit less wallowing around for who am I or what am I. So where we see that, I think, break down in a community or in permissive parenting, what can happen is that a child lacks the tools to discern largely right or wrong because somebody is just following the child without that bigger view of a goal in mind or an ideal perchance or however we choose to define that. So those children can kind of cast about thinking, at 2, is it okay for me to throw food all over and yell at mom and dad, or is it not okay? And when I get to be 4 and 5, maybe I can do the same thing to my teachers. And why would I expect to follow the the laws when I'm 15 and 16, and lacking that experience, that kind of defined set of values can really lead kids to a place of anxiety or kind of driftless experimentation. Whereas kind of getting back to the idea of how a community defines itself, you're absolutely right. As you mentioned earlier, some tribes are not all good guys, as it were. And yet, if a child is given that experience within a tribe of learning then from the outside world that, oh, that life is better or different, they're still able to contrast that to their background. So I'm not sure if that gets entirely to the idea.
Well, yeah, the question's also about, I think it's really good for people to have a clear idea about authoritative versus
Exactly.
authoritarian. Can you
Yes.
just define that? And then I want to go to follow the child, because as you know, follow the child is one of our, prerequisites within the work we do. But yes, it's not follow the child aimlessly. It's follow the child
Exactly.
because someone isn't speaking. So if you're not there to observe, then you haven't got much to go on. And you need to follow what motivates people, and that is true whether they're speaking or not. If you don't follow what motivates them, then you're in conflict. But and authoritarian to me is defined by conflict. It's I grew up not with my own family, but with the school system that I went through, a very, very authoritarian system. It's interesting, I meet conservative Americans and they meet me and they think, oh, you're such a hippie. It's like, you have no idea what conservative really is. If you'd gone through the school system that I went through, where we were beaten, daily, and we were all in the military, and we were all, very different, very, very different, very violent, very, blah, blah. Okay. But all that aside, it was authoritarian. And so what it meant was that there were two things that designed the school system, defined the school system I went through. One was that they said, you are all you boys are going to, because it was only boys, are going to be in competition with each other. We're going to set you into competition with each other, which means some of you will fail. And they were saying this to you at age 11. And we're going to break you down so that we can then build you up and give you privileges later. Why would they do that? Well, they would do that so that 100 years ago, people might go out and run the empire. And that was creating an officer class where people would go and sort of, with both a sense of personal confidence and a sense of absolute belief in the system, go and sort of die of malaria in the Sudan, aged 30, while trying to administer an area 4 times the size of Germany, just one province, and deal with the tribal wars and this and that, and have the kind of resilience to do that. But there would be a wastage, and you saw this wastage also happening in sort of World War One, where the officer class, the young officers, first over the trench, you were supposed to inspire the guys. So the average lifespan, of a young officer in World War One in the British Army was 6 weeks, because you had to be first over the lip of the trench and so on and so on. However, those that survived would then become the building blocks of the empire. And you can see how that worked very well for the people that were running the empire. You needed a group of people like this. But what it meant was that at the bottom line, if you bucked the system, if you said, I don't really want to follow these particular rules, you were met with violence immediately. So if you were going to go against the authority in any way, it was instantly physically violent. And what a lot of us learned was to actually cope with that and to say, oh, actually, I can survive that. And now what are you going to do? Because now I'm not afraid anymore. However, there were others who were completely destroyed by it. So I observed this growing up and thought, well, there has to be a better way. And so when you use the word authoritative, I like and I'm intrigued by that. Could you explain really to what we can? I think we can understand what authoritative means, but what authoritarian means. But let's go to authoritative.
The idea of an authoritative parenting model, or community for that matter, really is that there's an expectation, there's a standard that we might move toward. It is a model that allows for the exploration that you might think of with a permissive parenting model. But when that child turns to the parent, to the community, to look for an answer that they truly do want an answer for, they're looking for assistance, it's willing to provide that. Whereas a permissive parenting model kind of reneges on that responsibility. You have an underdeveloped brain or person coming to you looking for an answer, and with a permissive model, it's a reflective, let's say, well, should I have a cookie or an apple? Mom should have a cookie or an apple. Dad should have a cookie and apple. A truly permissive parenting model would say, well, what would you like? Well, with food engineering being what it is, it's a cookie. But with an authoritative model, it would be, I think an apple is going to make you feel healthier, or I think you should start with an apple. It's offering that guidance where it's due. And ultimately, all of us look for some structure. We are not living in an anarchy. You and I would like to go through a green light thinking that somebody is not going to drive through the red light. There are clearly levels of these, but what the authoritative model provides is it gets a little back to that safety as well. Like, if I'm lost, if I'm casting about, I can provide you something that will provide you comfort or safety in the longer term.
Right. I wrote a note here as you were. It sounds to me like you're talking about service to the community. That first there's the idea of what serves you. So do I have the cookie or the apple?
Right.
So my answer to that would be, I totally get why you want the cookie. I want the cookie too. And there will be cookies. Don't worry.
Yeah.
There will be cookies. However, maybe not those cookies, because those cookies are full of shite. But how about these cookies? But before we have those cookies, let's talk about the apple. Now, I'm not going to force you to have the apple,
Right.
but look, I'm going to have the apple. And what if we had both? What about apple and cookie? How about that? And then I would be prepared to go through a certain amount of because I have the same inside me. So I'm not going to say someone else shouldn't have it. But at the same time, I would take a slightly humorous approach to that and say, look, and also sympathetic. Like, I get it. They've marketed these cookies to us, and we are driven by sugar. Yeah, so of course you want it, but why don't we also have this apple as well? And I would hope that with that continued thing, and say, well, there's going to be no force here. There's going to be no, you must have the apple, or there'll be some sort of terrible consequence. But as you say, the cookie may make you not feel so good, and maybe you need to go through that feeling.
Yeah.
And when you go through that feeling, then I'm still here with the apple, and some will say, well, Rupert, why don't you just tell them to have the apple? Is that because then the cookie becomes a holy grail,
Exactly.
And so, how you tread the line between permissive and authoritative seems to me about what serves you best. And if you can appeal to the child to say, well, what's in the child's best interest on the end of the day? And then clearly mum and dad are thinking about my best interest. Then is it a sort of logical thing for me to think about the best interest of the community, the family? And the note that I took there is service to the community what actually provides for happiness and fulfillment in life?
Yeah, I think that evidence about that is increasing in a way that just makes a lot of sense when you have a community in an evolutionary perspective that shares resources or serves each other. When we were all just barely scraping by in caves or on a savanna or whatever, those what people call selfish genes do replicate by providing that service. There's the evidence surrounding a sense of fulfillment is universally supportive of a sense of service or commitment or attunement or any of these sorts of connection sort of ideas, that when we can place a child in, help them find their place in that world, I think a lot of the work that you share about experiences with hunter-gatherers and these sorts of things, these are very concrete contributions that children make at a small age. And their sense of attachment is so much more community focused than our world, where it's in a generally speaking Western world where we have work to do that's specialized work. We have bills to pay that are, technical, and we have projects to do that are too skilled. Then the child feels a little isolated. They lack that sense of service, and their kind of drive for that leads them to look for attention that I think often we wrongly think is attention that wants play or immediate gratification, whereas that attention seeking that's so hardwired is about finding that attunement, finding that connection, and then that safety, that I can do these things and somebody's with me and watching me and helping me through those.
Right. I guess in the old days we had, although, we didn't grow up in hunter-gatherer communities, sadly, where absolutely the community, everyone's in service to the community. But 2 generations ago, most people were growing up in some sort of family business, family farm, family, or not most, but certainly many, with kids being included in what was going on. Maybe they wanted to, maybe they didn't, but they were certainly included, and they were skilled from quite an early age in not just the physical or mental competences required in the family tailoring business or the family farm, but also the financials and the economics and the balancing the books and the, I've got to buy in this amount of feed and fertilizer or this amount of cloth and needles, and balance it against, blah, blah, blah. And that, of course, seems to have gone, that now, barring very few sort of isolated communities or people that are just lucky enough to grow up in certain types of family business. Now, the family farm, it's something that almost exists in myth now. You used twice in the last 5 to 10 minutes the word attunement. And this is a word which many of the people who listen to this podcast also listen to Warwick Schiller. And Warwick Schiller uses the word attunement a lot. And those of you who listen to Leanna Tank's podcast, where she's talking about the use of attunement with working with the criminally insane, and how that, if you haven't heard that one, by the way, listeners, you've got to go back and find Leanna Tank's interview. It's meaningful, and there's a lot in there that helps us all. What do you mean, Mark, by attunement? And what should we understand from this term?
Well, yeah, I lean heavily on Warwick Schiller's shorthand, which he always he describes as being seen, being heard, feeling felt, and getting gotten. And the first parts of that are very sensory. So they are, and again, with toddlers in my life every day, I always think of the toddler model. When a toddler approaches me, do I look at them, or am I seeing what they're doing? When I come into the room, does the toddler turn from me? Do they make nonverbal cues that they're concerned? And again, I just think toddlers are honest people, whereas the rest of us have this overlay of politeness and what should I do and these sorts of things. Yet we signal these things as well, without a doubt, as we talk to other people. And the idea of attunement is this, with toddlers, with mules, with horses, is that awareness that is not verbal. I think that it can have a verbal overlay, but the richest attunement with adults as well is more of a nonverbal sort of a dance. And the the role that plays in my life is, again, 20 times a day, I enter a room and I could have a kid that's gregarious, a kid that's hungry, a kid that was just told they can't be on their phone, or within moments, their physical reaction to me informs which way I go. Are they already goofy, and do they want me to make jokes? Are they quiet? Do they want me to use a quiet voice? Do I see that their shoes light up and they want to jump up in the ground, up and down on the ground? And and when a child has that sense of being seen, then they can start to develop a sense of comfort and safety and move away from that protective stance, that the stranger danger that's typically going to accompany at least a physician visit, but often any other new adult.
That's brilliantly put. I think you answered it incredibly succinctly. The non-verbal cues, which we learn through horses, really, really help us with the non-verbal cues with our fellow monkeys. And ultimately, our fellow monkeys are much more dangerous than our horses are. You've referred to the word stubborn quite a few times as well.
Right.
And you stubborn with the Basque community, but you seem to have referred to it as a positive.
Mm-hmm.
You've also now included the word mule. And I know you as a handler of a very good mule that I was lucky enough to meet when we were doing some training together. I wouldn't say that mule was stubborn. I would say that mule was 100% present and cooperative. I wouldn't have wanted to make that mule do anything it didn't want to do, but I wouldn't want to make any equine or human do something they wouldn't want to do. But nonetheless, you've sort of gone Basque, stubborn, mule in your life. Talk to us about that. Why have you gone for mules? Why do you feel stubborn is good? What do you mean by stubborn? Because people have different meanings around that word. And then talk to us a little bit about mules.
Yeah, I use stubborn, as you picked up, with it, some sense of pride, some sense of irony. It's obviously quite close to persistence and
perseverance, perhaps.
Perseverance, persistence, stubbornness, and
mountain people. You don't give up.
If you're in the equine assisted field, or if you're considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to consider taking one of our 3 neuroscience-backed equine assisted programs. Horseboy Method, now established for 20 years, is the original equine assisted program specifically designed for autism, mentored by and developed in conjunction with Dr. Temple Grandin and many other neuroscientists. We work in the saddle with younger children, helping them create oxytocin in their bodies and neuroplasticity in the brain. It works incredibly well. It's now in about 40 countries. Check it out. If you're working without horses, you might want to look at movement method, which gets a very, very similar effect, but can also be applied in schools, in homes. If you're working with families, you can give them really tangible exercises to do at home that will create neuroplasticity when they're not with you. Finally, we have taquine equine integration. If you know anything about our programs, you know that we need a really high standard of horsemanship in order to create the oxytocin in the body of the person that we're working with, child or adult. So this means we need to train a horse in collection, but this also has a really beneficial effect on the horse's well-being. And it also ends your time conflict where you're wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to condition my horses and maintain them and give them what they need, as well as serving my clients? Taquine equine integration, aimed at a more adult client base, absolutely gives you this.
Yes. Yeah. So the reason I like to lead with stubbornness is because of the baggage that it has, yet we flip the idea to persistent, and all of a sudden to perseverance, all of a sudden this is an attribute, right? And I suppose it's the goal to which that's directed. We talked about creation myths and the idea that the Basque people would be stubborn enough to run off the Romans and to stop the Moors as they came up across from southern
And
Spain.
Charlemagne and the Franks and everyone had to go.
Right.
The Visigoths, the Vandals,
whoever it is.
Yeah.
So it comes to define that group. And the mule, I know you have listeners of all backgrounds, and it's always fun to step back to the making of a mule. A mule is the product of a male donkey, a jack, and a female horse, a mare. There can be a converse, which could be a hinny, which is a female donkey and a male horse. But the vast majority of hybrids are mules. And the mule in our life has the value of being one of the most sure-footed of the equines in the mountains. So Idaho has the largest wilderness area within the contiguous 48, the lower 48 states, as it were, an area I've been lucky to move through as we talk about movement and experiences as hunter-gatherers. I've shared those experiences with many people in many ways. And as our family got into equines, that lure to be able to safely travel through rugged country is what drew us to work with mules. And that stubbornness is also a sense of self-preservation. So the background of the donkey is more a mountainous breed, to be around cliffs and other places where standing their ground was an option. And it was not the steppes of Asia where flight is always the survival mechanism. So the mule, and we get the pause, the stubbornness, as it were. And I remind myself and my kids that we want this in our mules because their sense of self-preservation keeps us safe. And I think one of the fun things that I've come to learn, we in our family have a Navajo pony, we have an Appaloosa horse, we have a mule, 2 mules, one of which may or may not be a hinny. But the mule will pause, and usually with the attunement that we have developed, carry on, for example, through a gully that maybe smells of coyote, or through something that's changed in the environment from when they walked out to when they walked back. The horse, our ponies, there are times where we will use them to lead because they, again, with that attunement that we've built, will be willing to override their sense of hesitation to try to move through something. Whereas the value of the mule in our area is really to take that pause. They see all 4 feet and they can move slowly and safely through those environments. And Sam came to us as a purposefully bred mule. He lived with his previous owner for 20 years approximately. And the time you saw him, he was 27. And
wow. He looked so good.
Yeah, he looks so good. And he, as you know, he's a willing mule. And that's because what people have asked of him in the past have been safe questions, have been trustworthy questions, largely speaking. He's not been forced. He's not been compelled to do something. And I hear this in your background from a military school of breaking somebody down and building them up. And the old breaking a horse, I guess it still exists somewhere, but we've been lucky enough to have models and mentors who start horses, who meet the horse where they are and move forward with that goal in mind. And Sam came to us largely in that path, and we've been lucky enough that Samuel continues to help us grow.
I love that he's called Samuel.
Yeah.
Right. Now, let's go back to the word stubborn, though. Stubborn can mean in its pejorative sense, in its negative sense, unwillingness to change, basically, right? Unwillingness to take on new perspectives, which, of course, is not a way of self-preservation, because, when the Vikings or whoever are coming over the hill, you can't say, well, they're not coming over the hill, or, I've lived here and this is my grandfather and my grandfather before him was on this land. And yeah, I know, dude, but there's like 8,000 dudes coming over the hill waving axes. So, how about we make a plan B or C or D? And the people that could make the plans, A to E were more likely to survive than the one who said, I will not move. We love to think of the kind of Gandalf, you shall not pass, but then again, he did get killed when he did that with the Balrog. And there might be a time for that type of self-sacrifice. And of course, we also assume that Gandalf is coming with a certain amount of self-confidence, of magic behind him, and he happens to know the King of the Eagles, who happens to come along. So he's got backup, and he wouldn't have stood there with his stuff and done that if he didn't feel he had backup. So you're not using the word stubborn in that pejorative way, yet nonetheless you are using that word. And I feel that when we're working with particularly people on the spectrum who are in the less flexible stage of their life, and I talk about this a lot with my son Rowan, who's 23 now. He's here in the house. He'd be the first to come up and say, yes, when I was young, I was incredibly inflexible, and I made it extremely stressful on everybody around me and myself. It's just that I kind of didn't have any choice in the matter, because that's where my brain and my nervous system were at. But little by little, I learned to be flexible. Talk a little bit about the dance between stubbornness and flexibility, because there are nuances there that I think deserve to be explored.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk a little bit about how you've gotten involved in equine assisted work. And then I want to go into a little bit about, as a pediatrician, what you see as the value of equine assisted work. So let's start with that dance between stubbornness in the pejorative sense and flexibility. And then let's go to mules and equine assisted.
Perfect. Well, I think one of the patterns that I see in pediatrics in these interactions, throughout the day, is somewhat of a default coping in all of us. At a first level of stress, do we cry? Do we dig in? Do we freak out? Do we shut down? And the idea, mule is a great example of this, and not always, because they have the horse as well. And so sometimes it goes to flight, but a tendency to just stop. Like, this is not okay. Let's stop.
Stop and observe, perhaps.
Yeah. And that plants the seed of stubbornness, I suppose. So if that in a person persists and we stop and we do not change, then what is an acceptable coping strategy becomes a maladaptive coping strategy, I would suppose. And the same, can be true of flexibility. If I change at a whim every, passing fad, then I've lost a sense of self and where I might move forward with something. So the dance, and it's a dance, as I mentioned, I think I see with every kind of identity or coping strategy, or however a person would think, is that time where it serves us well, or in kind of balking, as it were, or stopping. Am I safe? Is it safe to continue? Now I can move on. That is where I think I hesitate to think of stubborn as always maladaptive. And
Right.
I do, it gets to the nuance of definition, but I think that it's fair to call it stubborn first, because I do believe that it becomes persistence when it's adaptive, and that it becomes a bad thing when it isn't. Like you said, you just hold fast to something that is a lost cause. That's not so good.
Right. And I think the reason why it was good to hear you explore that is because for a lot of people that are working with, inflexible neuropsychiatric cognitive conditions, I had no choice. I was a dad and I found myself in that situation. So I just had to cope and I had to figure out a way. So that obviously what I did is I went for mentorship, and I went for mentorship with Dr. Temple Grandin. And she said, do these 3 things. I did those things and they worked. So, so my persistence and my stubbornness is like, I will not give up on this child
Right.
in this situation, even though it's beyond my current resources. What I'll do is I'll look for someone who's got those resources and I will have them, mentor me. A lot of the people that are working with special needs, they may not be coming out of this type of situation. So let's say you're an 18-year-old and you are finishing college and you decide, or just you're going out into the world, say, I like this world. I would like to help these people. I myself am adolescent, which means I come with a certain inflexible mindset,
Right.
and because my amygdala is still not, our brains are developing up until the age of about 25. I mean, they're always developing, but you know what I mean? There's these imbalances between the amygdala and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex that don't really even out for a while, which is why, we're rocky and self-absorbed as adolescents, right? And we come by it honestly, it's just how our brains are developing. And then we kind of cool out a little bit. But many people are, as young people are going into the field before really their own brains have gone through these changes. And then we horse people are notoriously close-minded. It's a drum that I thump a lot because I'm a great believer that all horse people should go and learn other disciplines of horseness all the time, rather than saying, I don't do this, or I don't use nosebands, or I don't use bits, or I won't do this, or those cowboys are terrible, or the hunter jumpers are terrible, or that this is terrible, that that's. You won't know until you go and learn it. If you think it's bad, go learn it and then decide. I'm often encouraging people in our trainings to say, if you're asking people who have difficulty adapting to do really difficult things like communicate, or with a horse go into that trailer, which is a big dark hole, or accept a rider on the back, or get toilet trained if you're a kid or whatever, then what difficult, challenging thing are you doing? What language are you learning? What difficult physical skill are you learning? What computer programming, scratchy, heady thing are you trying to learn? So that, because if you're not constantly finding yourself back at the beginner stage of things, what tools have you really got to lead somebody else with 2 legs or 4 through that process? So I like that you're talking about the need to persist. How do we cultivate enough open-mindedness so that we can do what a mule does, so that we can pause and observe, so that, and then go and discern, right, okay, I guess the way down the mountain is actually there. Or, yes, it smells of cougar, but 2 weeks ago, or how, so we don't want to always override, but sometimes we need to override. Sometimes we need to say, smells of cougar half an hour ago, but I got to get down that slope. All right, now how do I do it? So that to some degree is the equine assisted world. It's dancing that dance. How do we take this pausing positive stubbornness and turn it into looking for opportunity for ways through dilemmas, basically?
Well, I think your work does an excellent job of providing that idea. I have a goal of improved communication in mind with somebody I'm working with autism in an equine assisted sense. And when I see an opening, that's what I can go with. When I see a pause, I reflect on why the pause, what caused a loss of that sense of safety. Was it something to validate? The awareness of that is critical for moving forward, that being attuned to that hesitation is what allows the next step.
I like that. Being attuned to that hesitation allows for finding the next step.
Yeah. And I love those times of opportunity with patients, with the times that I've gotten too close to their bubble and they went from smiling to shut down. That's in a nutshell, when I'm building that 5-minute relationship, which I get, that's my time to realize that with them, give them that pause, and then move forward. And in a bigger sense, in a relationship that you're developing therapeutically, or we're developing in an equine assisted sense, those pauses and that asking of a yes question. This is a horsemanship, mulemanship idea, right? Let's ask a question that our horse can achieve. Let's ask a question that our patient, that our child, that our colleague can say yes to. That's what builds the trust and that connection and attunement, especially with our nonverbal learners, is really validating to their existence.
Right. So you're a pediatrician. What to you is the value of equine assisted work as a whole? Why is it a good thing?
I think one of the biggest things it does is it provides a different model. We're in a model in science that has a lot of value for breaking down questions of, is this medicine going to kill bacteria? Is this vaccine going to save lives? But it's not as good at the holistic pattern. What combination of things for a given child create progress? We know that certain models, ABA, for example, and something you're well aware of, is one that shows promise for a number of people. And we have outliers to that. We know that from the scientific model, but what we don't always pick up is the subtleties of the why. Why is that person an outlier? Was it time of day, person that we're working with, whatever it is? The equine assisted model allows an entirely different paradigm. And I think that the work you do to bring that back to all kinds of neurotransmitters and the science behind that validates that the equine assisted world in a scientific model, in some regards, provides the observation. Science starts with an observation and a subsequent hypothesis, and then a testing of the hypothesis. And then is that testing, is that repeated testing? Do we get the same result? And the observation that being around horses helps me feel better, helps our autistic son feel better, allows us to take the next step in medicine, in the research model of saying, well, is there something that we can isolate from that? Is it the horse? Is it the movement? Is it the production of oxytocin? Is it just the handler? And they could be riding a tricycle. The medical model, the scientific model, allows us to delve into that, but there's the mystery of the horse, the horse that is just not easy to replicate. In my experience, I think we started with a horse and then a pony, and then added mules, and there's just enough more resistance in a mule to feel a little bit more like a toddler. In that, a horse, as I worked with them, their pause or hesitation would tend to be more active. And in my start, I felt confident. Let's say we were trying a new movement and the lope starts. Well, you want to lope? Let's lope. I love loping. This is a great excuse for that. Whereas the mule will tend to have that pause, and forcing through doesn't really get us to the right direction. It's in my horse experience, I kind of lost that moment. Why was that? Because the movement allowed me to move past it. Whereas I think that pause that I see in a mule more commonly is a little more analogous to a toddler and to people, to our peers, because there's that, not just, well, I'm going to flee the scene. That's a little more inherent to the horse. The response of a mule still has that opening for, okay, now we're both here, not doing what I would like to do. How do we still get there?
Interesting. So it kind of forces more inventive communication in a way. And I think we also all know that mules are hyper intelligent. They're more intelligent than the sum of their parts, right? So they tend to be more intelligent than horses and more intelligent than asses. Certainly than my ass. So you must be familiar with that, with the poet Ogden Nash. He was a poet, American jazz age poet, writing in sort of sophisticated New York, and he wrote funny, often satirical poems about everything from sort of marriage to making a martini and he had lots and lots of ones about animals, and the giraffe or the lion or the elephant. He one about mules, and I love it. It's 2 lines. It's, in the world of mules, there are no rules.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
And to me
That's
that
funny.
that really is good. And I've done 2 really big mountain trips in my life with mules. One was in Spain 30 plus years ago, and another one was in Lesotho in the highlands of southern Africa. And what you could really see was the discernment that the mules had about how to handle situations, and that if you were to try to force anything, the mule might actually react badly and push you off the cliff. But if you went with the mule and did allow the pause and the slowness, and that the mule would get you and your stuff down or up safely.
Yeah.
But you had to meet them more than halfway. And I felt that, but it was a fair exchange, but because they're going to get you. You are involved in an equine assisted organization. Tell us about that. Where is it? What is it? I know, because I went, to do a training there, but I still like you to introduce it and talk about it. And what do you feel the value of their particular approach is that jives with you as a pediatrician, not just as a dad who wants to do nice things for kids with horses. So tell us, what is the equine assisted organization that you're involved with? Just start there.
Sure. The organization is called the Warm Springs Care Farm, and it's probably the one and the only. If you were to Google Warm Springs Care Farm, it pulls its name from the geothermal hot water that runs down the street, the warm springs that heat all these historic homes along Warm Springs. Historically, all those homes came with enough land for horses and a carriage house. And the Warm Springs Care Farm is one of the few that's maintained enough acreage to have an arena, and they've since added some goats and chickens and these sorts of things. And the value, I'm lucky enough to live on the same road and have the same experience in my backyard, is to come over a bench and down over a canal into what feels like an oasis within the city. And Warm Springs Care Farm really embraces that. It's not a forest-based learning environment. It's an oasis, and that comes with small animals as well: ducks, chickens, as I mentioned, goats. Just the break that adults, we kind of, again, we circled back a little bit to the idea that we're all nonverbal in communication. These emotions, these senses that we have, we don't lose them. We just choose to ignore them at times. And basically crossing this threshold at the Warm Springs Care Farm, you're in a place that is a different pace. And the role that they play is creating this space for growth, for therapy that is driven by the participants. They are not so solely focused on equine work that they don't welcome the drumming circle. They have a farm club for kids. They have some dance groups and other things. They welcomed your clinic, which was, I think, a breakthrough for a lot of us in the idea of how to engage with work that is demanding and compelling, yet tiring. And so that organization basically provides the openness with the physical location to make those experiences rich for anybody that visits there.
What role do you play there, and what do you feel your insight as a pediatrician brings to you doing that work?
Well, I think it's such a great, refreshing thing to be able to say, I know of this place that is magical, that is not another appointment. It's not another, therapy that a child is compelled to go to. It is something that's engaging. And, not all kids are engaged in that model of growth, but the ones who are find it so reassuring. And I think that with the involvement that fortunately I've been able to have some, not as much as I would like, based on demands of being a working dad and a pediatrician and a mule owner and other things, but that there's some clear validation to that approach, that within medicine we will have patients that have not done well in therapy, even though for some people that's the right answer, who haven't done well in an occupational therapy building where it's more of an artificial environment. Some kids thrive with what's provided in that setting. And the role I think that I'm able to play is to advocate for the value that they provide and recognize that as a legitimate and important way forward for families and kids, and that it's not some hippie thing that is just playing with animals and not growing, but instead it provides that kind of that crucible in which growth can occur.
It's so interesting that we use the word hippie in pejorative. Here I say I'm a total hippie, obviously, as a pejorative, because of course the counterculture, otherwise known as the hippie culture, arose out of science. That the Allen Ginsberg and these people who were all PhDs, they were all doctors, most of them were at Ivy League schools. A lot of the people that engendered the counterculture movement were actually scientists. The reason they were experimenting with altered states of consciousness was for the same reason that the CIA were and still are, but with an idea to heal rather than to harm or control. And yet we still have this almost sort of slightly guilty thing of, even though it was clear the hippies got it right in terms of quality of life, like what would you have rather have been in the early 1960s? Would you rather have been the bloke who was just chained to that corporate ladder, or would you rather have been at Woodstock? And then gone away and founded Ben and Jerry's? Which would you rather? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being on the corporate ladder, and there's also not anything wrong with being a hippie that does not go and found Ben and Jerry's. But many of the hippie generation, of course, actually did become really good entrepreneurs as well as scientists and so on, and really were the kind of blazed the trail for the freedom that we think of now as Western culture, that we can clearly see in this world where it's under threat and challenge. Would we rather live in a totalitarian society where we can't express these things, or what would we? Well, I think we all know what we'd rather. We'd all, rather have a bit more rock and roll. So, and this of course starts with our children. Yet we do still feel this sort of slight guilty thing about going one, but I am supposed to be a very serious person, and even though none of us ever wanted to be, because we're just toddlers at the end of the day. And you talk about saying, yes, it's good as a doctor to be able to give validation. We now know the neuroscience behind hippiedom, why it works. We, whether it's an altered states of consciousness and why they work, or whether it's why working with horses through oxytocin and BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is actually neuroplasticity, why it works. These things have now been looked at, and then you can get to the more esoteric stuff, like the Heart Math Institute, looking at the emission of photons out of the heart and electromagnetic. Plus people say, oh, that's all bollocks. Well, I live in Germany. It's not bollocks. The University of Kassel up the road, which is very German, did a whole study about 25 years ago into the emission of photons from human hearts and how in states of empathy, they go way farther out. And therefore, we do actually affect the people around us in this really positive way, and blah, 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 blah. So it's well studied, right? It's well studied.
Absolutely.
But yet the authoritarian thing, because we all inherited this religious and militaristic thing. There's some little part of us that did drink the Kool-Aid, and even though it's cultish, it is frankly cultish, feels a slight sense of kind of guilt for the fact that we know that that's the better way. So I love that as a doctor you can then say, well, look, yes, while certain types of very structured therapies will provide some answers, there are not just a few outliers, there are hundreds of thousands of them. And my son did not do well with ABA. No, absolutely not. And ABA people, they do not invite Temple Grandin into their conferences because they know she's going to say, sorry lads, but it's too limited, because at the end of the day it's coercive, But you have also talked about, I don't want to talk about what we're against, because also I know very good ABA therapists, and in the state of California you can actually get horseboy and movement method approved as ABA, because there are certain BCBAs down there who believe in what we do. So I don't want to be in this sort of them and us thing. But one thing I love that you have said is, I've written them down, you have said, as well as stubborn and attunement, you said a place that is magical. You also said the mystery of the horse. You also said the je ne sais quoi of it all. And yet you're a doctor, where your job is to be the je sais très bien quoi, not the je ne sais quoi. I'm sorry, je ne sais quoi. So magic, mystery, being comfortable saying I don't know. When we go into a pediatrician's office, that's not the language that makes people feel at ease. And yet, of course, we know that this is 50% of reality. Talk to us about that as a doctor, the importance of magic and mystery and je ne sais quoi. Why is it important?
I think that it's built into pediatrics. There's no mystery greater than that gap sometimes between the adults and the parent, and the child, this like, I want this and I don't want this, and this is a mystery to me, what's going on here. And I see my role as kind of entering that mystery. And I've learned this from the equine world. Now, first of all, because of my background, as we talked about, in my experience, I have felt comfortable with children, and when I kind of enter their world, maybe I'm still a little, just like you, a toddler, adolescent, and all these things all at once. And I'm willing to enter that and then interpret for the family what I've learned as an adult learner in mules and horses is mentors that talk me through the process, that what seems, I've been called baby whisperer or whatever else like that. And that's a nice compliment. It's mysterious and it seems unachievable to families. But when I say, well, your baby wanted to be rolled over on its stomach with its chin propped up here, and watch, they want this much bouncing, not that much bouncing. The mystery unravels in a positive way. What I think was somewhat appealing in an early part of my career was to think, oh, I'm just good with kids, and like too bad these people can't figure it out or whatever. But they are the people that figure it out, and it's something that can be translated. It's not a mystery as much as it might be. And I think this is, as a learner, something where the way that you can transition to an in-hand P-off is mysterious to me. But it's broken down, and you do that, and it's no mystery. That's a little different than, I think, the mystery I was referring to earlier of that connection, that primordial movement on the top of a horse that takes us back to Mongolia or places beyond that we
Something
are
ancestral, perhaps.
ancestral. Absolutely, that we are still a monkey on a horse helping it move, and that communication doesn't matter. Our horse doesn't have an iPhone, it turns out. They still have the mammalian drive lines and the mammalian responses. And when we can practice those with this unadulterated version of the mammalian nervous system, we bring that back to infants. And I love the early stage where, lots of questions, lots of TikTok videos and gizmos and gadgets and AI assisted bassinets. And yet it's just a baby that is going to respond to the same cues that a baby 200,000 years ago did. Is it hungry? Is it comforted in a swaddled sense? Is it feeling unsafe? Is it wanting help? Is that it's crying because it wants help? so that I think that there's a mystery that we, in a good sense, can break down with some of these things. With horses, a mystery; with babies, and yet a sense of mystery, the awe, is something that I don't think I lose with children. Their honesty, their quirkiness, their sense of humor, and that is, I think, something that, as we mentioned, was celebrated in my upbringing, but is one of those that's a universal, I think, experience, that from children in the Bible to how children are perceived in different cultures around the world. I think there's an elevation of that sense of innocence and maybe the kind of the mystery that lies within that.
Yes, and perhaps you talk about the mammalian sense, although there are occasions in mammalian things where infanticide happens.
Yep. Yeah.
When the lion takes over the pride, promptly goes and kills, or when the stallion takes over the herd, it has sex with the mares to make them all abort the fetus of the next one, and these are brutal, horrible ways of serving the DNA requirements. But you're also talking about the mammalian nervous system, and I'd like to talk about that a bit, because I often call it the mammalian caregiving system. That it's actually not difficult to figure out what mammals want, because whether they're loner mammals like tigers, or whether they're group ones like lions, they do, when they're young, require all the same nurture, and if they don't get it, they die. But before I go there, and I want you to talk a bit about what is the mammalian nervous system, I think it's useful to have it actually sort of broken down. Is the places that is magical, is the importance of a magical feeling place, is that it's whimsical. And what I mean by whimsical is beautiful in a natural way that's on a human scale, or at least on a scale that we feel we can participate in. And does that make us feel safe because it feels like biodiversity, which feels like abundant food, which feels like an environment that we can thrive in, as opposed to harsh concrete or harsh cliffs, which, while they might be impressive, we can't thrive in, and actually are threatening to us. So is magical in the positive sense, whimsical meaning we can thrive here,
Mhm.
And then is the mystery of the horse and the je ne sais quoi,
Mhm.
is that actually listening? Is that actually that what appears to be mysterious? Is it just that one has to learn to listen? You talk about the mule that takes the pause. The mule listens. The mule says, all right, well, I don't know what's going on here, so let me listen with all my senses to try to make the correct decision here. And then you say, okay, well, Rupert, when you transition a horse into the piaffe, it looks magical. And I say, well, no, it's actually 300 little stages, each of which is very logical by itself. But when you put them all together, it has a magical look to it or a mysterious look to it. But if you break them down, it's the same process as any other process. But it does require a certain kind of listening
Mhm.
to discern those 300 little things, or to know how to approach those 300 little things with a given horse. And then you talked about awe. Do we respond well to awe? And there's a lot of studies now about awe, right? Because it gives us a sense of perspective, i.e. that I stand in front of the mountain, I stand in the face of a beautiful piece of art, I stand in front of the horse and feel the sense of awe, which means I get a sense of perspective on myself, and suddenly I'm transported from my ego. I'm not now hearing the little voice in my head that's telling me I'm shit all the time. It's gone beyond that. It's gone beyond me. And now I have this sense of perspective, which is healing because I actually get a break from my own BS, Right. Is that actually what's going on with all these things? And is that why they're actually really not? And then you talk about the mammalian nervous system. How does the mammalian nervous system engage with these things as a doctor, to create well-being?
Right. Yeah. The starting point, I think, for that, it certainly brings us back to the mammalian nervous system and its job, first and foremost, to keep us alive. And then from there to help us be comfortable and proliferate, and in that order. So when we are considering any of these things that the horse, the mule, the toddler find uncomfortable, that's the starting point, is the safety. If we're not safe, we don't get to eat a cheeseburger and make a baby. We have not passed go.
You're
So
right.
the safe starting point, the combination of, and we live in the arid West, and we have both crickets and rattlesnakes. And on a given run, I could see either, but I suppose it's DNA and a little bit of learning. But the first response to a cricket on a run is always rattlesnake, no cricket. It's that safety first. But by learning on that same run, as I start cross pathing more and more crickets, it's never a rattlesnake until, oops, like I misjudged that one, and that's a rattlesnake. But the role, simplistically, I think, of the mammalian nervous system are those two things: safety and proliferation.
Okay.
And where we enter into somebody else's world, a toddler, a mule, a nonverbal autistic child, we need to enter providing a sense of safety. And if we don't provide that, then any well-meaning degree, approach, environment is going to fall flat. And so the role in healing as a physician, that sense of kind of the combination of mammalian brain, safety, and mystery comes in, is that the trust that I build with a child is what extends to the family's buy-in. And in the equine assisted world, it's, you've had guests on your podcast who are like, Rupert Isaacson's my last shot, and this quirky stuff that's not a medicine, is not covered initially by insurance or this or that, is yet by providing that engagement. And what I love, I don't live with an autistic child, but I love about pre-verbal children and nonverbal children is the authenticity of their responses. That especially when their families lived with that, they can see what you create, what we create in an equine assisted world within moments at times. Now, that isn't immediately the word count or the toileting or whatever it is, but the safety that's provided, the down regulation of all the stress hormones is what then allows for building of those other connections. And that gets back to the idea of a goal, the authoritative model of it's fun to play on ponies and playing on ponies when we count the hoofbeats moves us in a direction that we value. And so that I was lucky enough this past week, I work as a river guide on the Middle Fork of the Salmon, which is 100 miles of wilderness river.
Man of many talents. I want to come and do that.
Yeah, we'll put you on the list. You would thrive. And with this upcoming conversation I was expecting, I floating through on a raft in this wilderness area where bighorn sheep thrive and mountain lions and this sense of awe. And I'm thinking, why awe? Why do I have awe? And I don't know, but I do believe that you're right about that humbling factor of it, the perspective that's provided. Why? I mean, it's nice to think of us as the smart ape, the Homo sapiens, I suppose. But what purpose has that served us? And I know what purpose it serves me now, and maybe that's what it's always served. It's a purpose of recentering, a purpose of humility and appreciation that, those rocks, we have a lot of concerns in our world, but those rocks and those cliffs, like, they're going to be there. They may have noxious weeds on them. They may be deforested, but something about that is eternal. And maybe that's that sense of awe allows us to let go of things, and always had. We think of ourselves as extremely challenged, but how many of us are fearful for lions behind our back while we're still struggling to get enough berries collected before we starve? So those same emotions that underlie that, and that, again, that combination of how those things move us forward is still a mystery. And I think that's one of the richness of delving into how working with a horse or a mule can solve a problem that is not answered by our reductive approach, our breaking apart of pieces and numbers and substances and neurons and all that stuff. If we can embrace that mystery, I think it offers us a feeling of hope as well for families.
If you're a horse nerd, and if you're on this podcast, I'm guessing you are, then you've probably also always wondered a little bit about the old master's system of dressage training. If you go and check out our Helios Harmony program, we outline there step by step exactly how to train your horse from the ground to become the dressage horse of your dreams in a way that absolutely serves the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the horse and the rider. Intrigued? Like to know more? Go to our website, heliosharmony.com. Check out the free introduction course. Take it from there.
Yeah, and let's talk about nurturing. And then there's something else I want to return to with nature. What is the mammalian caregiving system? I think this is really worth drawing some attention to, because I don't feel this is emphasized in the sort of training which one gets in most therapeutic paradigms. I mean, it comes with things. Yes, we want to be empathetic, or we want to be, yeah, okay. And we certainly want to be good to our horses and so on. But I think it's often missed why physical nurture is so important to a mammal.
Right.
And what a horse can give with this. Just can you talk us through a bit the mammalian caregiving system as a pediatrician?
Sure. Mammalian caregiving system, I love thinking about this in two ways. One is the cold scientific way, and that would be it provides us with procreation and advancement of our genes. And I do believe that even within that cold scientific kind of approach, there's now been extensive work done into how that interaction relates to things we would think of as mental health and wellness and fulfillment and these sorts of things. So ultimately, that interaction where a baby comes out looking quote unquote cute, they are, and we are programmed to consider this animal vulnerable, deserving of attention, and that in turn leads to that physical connection. And whether riding on the back of a horse or holding a toddler or dancing with your partner, those connections create a whole cascade of well-being that is what we think of as the bond.
Right.
And mammal, the term mammal comes from mammary gland, which linguistically speaking, most languages that I've learned have a ma in a ma in the mom, the ama, the madre, because the M sound is just an early phonetic sound that babies make. And so getting back to that connection, the first thing they're associating sound with, we have associated sound with as a culture and a scientific pursuit, is still rooted in that, basically that request for attention that comes from the infant. And what we see is that in time, we've had this fluctuation of, well, what is good for a baby? Well, it's good for a baby to have contact and to feel safe. And yet, as I alluded earlier, we have so little experience with babies that our first thing when we think about their safety is not dropping them. Be careful. Don't do this. Don't do that. And they're treated with such fear and tension that it doesn't take long for some kids to kind of already kind of internalize that. Whereas that sense of bringing something together, the night and day difference between a hours old baby who's unswaddled versus swaddled is very simple. And it gets back to that connection. And if that connection, the swaddling occurs, and then that baby's with dad or with mom or uncle or whoever, there's this basically a connection that occurs that causes both parties to relax. And one of our ongoing struggles in modern medicine is the isolation that occurs in that bonding. So we have a baby in a hospital, which is a safer place to have a baby than a savannah. But we have a baby in a hospital and send a dyad, a mom and a baby and a dad, three people home to have an isolated experience where there's, ideally there are people to hand off to and that sort of thing. And those are the families that thrive. But our current model separates that grouping in a way that's not supported in any prehistorical evidence or any other kind of primate models necessarily. So that a mammalian bond, the need to feed a baby and to nurture them, our babies are not pre-programmed to swim to the ocean and make more babies. Our babies need to be fed, they need to be nurtured. And that process, because it's it's risky for the adult. It's consuming of resources and all that other sort of stuff. It has evolved to create feelings of goodwill, good feelings that make us as parents engaged in that process. And most new parents of children or new dog parents or whatever it is get that early sense of attachment that this is a different thing that I am invested in. And that's essentially hardwired because that's necessary for the procreation and the advancement of our species. So that mammalian caregiving system is one that we really interrupted in the modern world, where we had small family groups that were surrounded with other babies and other caregivers, and now it becomes a kind of an individual stress that can be really hard to bear, especially lacking any practice in it. So we recently and historically have disrupted that, and for whatever reason, the movements over the years have sometimes elevated the stay-at-home mom or the wet nurse, or name your model that was supposed to be a better way to raise children. And they've all had their struggles. And when we get back to that sense of community that we kind of started with, the other trusted adults, that's where we see kids thrive, when they have that variety of engaged people.
Right. And the hugging, the contact, the physical contact, of course, and the breastfeeding, but any of the good, oxytocin. And oxytocin makes us not only feel good and safe and soothed, but it makes us communicate, right? It's the hormone of communication. So it's our survival strategy for problem solving, for conflict resolution, and making sure that we don't all end up eaten by the hyenas, and it seems to me that, when people are coming from a place of high stress, high cortisol,
sure,
one of the things a horse can do is provide an awful lot of oxytocin, either through the movement, rocking of the hips, or through the body-to-body contact of such a large, welcoming animal.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, that, it seems such a mystery when really all that's going on is just a reinforcement of the basic human needs. You must be familiar, obviously, with some people call him Maslow, some people call him Maslow, the social, psychologist and sort of general scientist who came up with the system of human needs, right?
Right.
As you were
hierarchy,
the hierarchy of human needs, and as you were talking, I pulled them up on my phone. So for those who don't know, it's a pyramid, and it starts with physiological needs. So water, food, shelter, sleep, warmth, air to breathe, and then safety needs, personal security, i.e. no violence, crime, war, health and well-being, stable environment, financial security, safety nets, food. And then only after those two do you get love and belonging. Only after those two can you get family, friendship, community, romantic relationships, group memberships. So like those two things have to be there. And then after that, you can get esteem, self-respect, or respect within the community. And finally, some idea of self-actualization. But you need all of these building blocks in place. What's interesting about that is I've had, many social psychologists in my family, and, what I only found out recently, and you talk about living in the arid West, was that Maslow himself came up with that because he lived with the Blackfoot Indians for about 6 weeks in 1938. And he had this explained to him, and then never credited the indigenous people that he'd gotten it from, because I think he was at Harvard. He would have been censured back then. He would have lost his job. Because of Western arrogance and racism. You couldn't say that these ooga booga people over there had given you this. But of course, so many of the modalities that we use are indigenous, right? So cranial sacral work totally came out of Native American stuff. So did Feldenkrais and the Feldenkrais method. And it's almost what I do. I was mentored by the Bushman, by the San in the Kalahari. And the list goes on. And then, of course, you get into allopathic medicine and we're giving drugs and all of this stuff. Well, where do we get these drugs from? We get them from pharmacological compounds, which are actually mostly plants, which we get from indigenous people who show the people from the pharmaceutical companies what works for menstrual cramps and what works for headaches and so forth. And we get aspirin from willow, and it's all ancestral knowledge. And then we have bedside manner. You know, there are doctors that kill their patients because they're arrogant pricks. And there are doctors that, you know, whose patients seem to get better, even though they didn't do as well at medical school as the arrogant prick doctor, because they just have a good empathetic bedside manner. And that would seem to be love and shamanism and altered state of consciousness and placebo effect and all of these things coming into an interplay. And yet we feel we have to view these things through a sterile lens when actually they're not at all. You're dancing that dance between the ancestral and the modern, the allopathic and the holistic, the mammalian caregiving system and the clinical. And in the middle of this stands the horse. And there you are on the hunt. And what is the horse, of course, but to really, for many of us, a personification in personality of nature. As we've hit the 2-hour mark here, but as a doctor, what about nature? Do you prescribe it? Does a growing number of doctors are prescribing time in nature now? Is there such a thing as nature deficit disorder? What does it do to the human nervous system to not be in contact with nature? You're a doctor.
Yeah. The role of a doctor is to heal. And if we take any tool out of our tool belt because of arrogance or a preconceived notion, we're already neglecting our role. And absolutely, I prescribe nature. Absolutely, I prescribe community. And absolutely, there are some families that's not available. And medicine has, I always talk about the medicines that affect mood or learning as a bridge. And it's a life-saving bridge for some people. And the end of medicine is recognizing, ideally, and often I fall short, a goal of self-actualization, a goal of getting to that best self. And it's kind of like following the child. Well, it is following the child. This patient, this person is where they are. And if where they are has homelessness and school volatility and ADHD and Ritalin stabilizes that, then that's the safety that medicine can provide to move to that next step. And it's a constant compromise. I can't bring everybody out to ride Sam in my clinic. Sam Mule would love it. And I wouldn't have the life that I have now because it would all be volunteer work. But the awareness of that is so much bigger than the clinic room. And this is where relying on people like yourself or others that expand the conversation, that don't foreclose different ways of both providing safety and growth. That's where families can find some validation, I think, and those families that are able to change their learning environment and integrate horses into their learning, or the movement is a part of the learning that they provide. That's something that I can walk with them as well. And I just feel so lucky to have happened into people that can expand my horizons, that allow me to incorporate that vision into the work that is the clinical work that has medicines, the clinical work that has metrics, the clinical work that has numbers, yet the clinical work that always has a patient with it. And that's a beauty that's not lost in modern medicine. It may be lost in modern quote unquote health care, but that relationship that you mentioned that can help a patient heal despite worse numbers at the start is, I know I speak for the vast majority of my colleagues when I say that's what keeps us here for all the struggles that patients feel. It's day in and day out as a physician. And so when we have models that can enrich that in equine assisted world sort of models, when we can bring in something where we're constantly learning, and I don't get any CMEs for all the horse and mule clinics I've done, but boy, has it informed my ability to communicate with families. And when those things combine, in my world, serving that patient and that family, that ultimate test is what I'm looking to pass, that meeting them where they are and walking in that journey. It's really rich, really blessed to have that opportunity.
Should all pediatricians go volunteer at some sort of nature-based thing to give them that type of perspective of how human communities thrive, basically?
Yeah, absolutely.
Should it be there in medical school?
Yeah, yes. And absolutely. And it is through some of your work, obviously, and others. I think the era of arrogant medicine is hopefully passing, and humble medicine. This is similar to the balance that we talked about with authoritative, and passive guidance. There is expertise in medicine. There are studies, there are medicines, there are known approaches that should be given when people are looking for a paradigm that offers that. It should be provided. It should be allowed that we have this, that we have other opportunities. What isn't fair to a family and to a patient is to just give them a menu and say, I'll come back when you're ready to order. This is your menu.
Or worse, say you must go down only this path.
Or even worse, yes,
medications
the authoritarian.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. These either extremes are those that don't serve families well. And we, with a place like the Warm Springs Care Farm and other practitioners in the area, we're lucky to hold those up as options. And we are quite fortunate that we can provide certain medicines that serve as a bridge for those families that aren't in the place of safety and security to embrace that next step in that self-actualization. And it's a rich area that we get to play with as hopefully equine assisted work, movement method sort of work, those things that embrace the holistic improvement in function of any person, whether a neurodivergent, ADHD, anxious, those combination of things are going to be the most successful.
It's a great delight to hear a doctor say this, and we are beginning to see this change. There's a horseboy movement method center in the UK called Move the Mind, run by an amazing person called Nicole Gillard, and they're close to Bristol University, which is one of the big medical schools in the UK. And now she gets the medical students that she was contacted by the university, because a lot of the medical students are horsey girls, and they now come out and the university pays her to do their mental health electives there. And as you may know, there's a fairly eminent physician, Dr. Megan McGavin,
Yep.
in Virginia, who is an autism mum who runs a really good practice, autism movement method and horseboy practice called Chats in Yorktown in Virginia. But her work was instrumental in getting East Virginia Medical School, which is part of Old Dominion University, to put on last year a neuroscience conference specifically for pediatricians, looking at nature-based solutions. And we ran it last year with various neuroscientists and so on. I think we're going to do it again next year. Would you come and be a speaker there and present, and people could then come and talk to you? And yeah,
sure. I'd be honored. I'm not sure if I'll be able to bring Sam to Virginia.
Ooh. You have to at least show us some video.
There we go.
Yeah,
I would be honored. That last opportunity, but it would be a pleasure.
And then Warm Springs Care Farm. I presume people can find this online if they type in Warm Springs Care Farm, Boise, Idaho.
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
And you probably don't want to give away your private email over the internet, but perhaps
I'm okay. I've actually, inspired by you and others, I've just started to dabble in a podcast that I do have an associated email.
Right.
My podcast is called The Kid Wrangler. So far, it's just on Spotify. The Kid Wrangler on Spotify. And then the email address that people are welcome to email me at is the Idaho Kid Wrangler @gmail.com.
The Idaho Kid Wrangler at gmail.com. Brilliant. I look forward to listening.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me. I am largely here because of the amazing work you're doing, and seeing any improvement in how people do is just rewarding.
Thank you.
Share that as a community.
Well, I shall be seeing you down the trail then.
All right.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please do like, subscribe, tell a friend. It so helps us to get this valuable work done and the message of equine assisted stuff out there. And if you're interested in more conversations, you might want to check out our Live Free, Ride Free podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcasts, please go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. If you're a professional in the equine assisted field or are considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to check out our 3 certification programs: Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Taquine Equine Integration. You can find all of those over on newtrailslearning.com. And finally, if you want to check out our cool rock and roll themed merch, back on rupertisaacson.com, please click on shop. You'll find all kinds of fun goodies there. And if you're looking for a way to spend time until the next podcast, you might want to consider reading the books that kicked all this off: The Horseboy, The Long Ride Home, and The Healing Land. So see you next time on Equine Assisted World. Join us for the adventure.